Pawn e2 to e4. Pawn e7 to e6. Pawn d2 to d4. Pawn d7 to d5. Knight b1 to d2. Knight g8 to f6. Pawn e4 to e5. Knight f6 to d7. Bishop f1 to d3. Pawn c7 to c5. Pawn c2 to c3. Knight b8 to c6. Knight g1 to e2. Pawn c5 takes d4. Pawn c3 takes d4. Knight d7 to b6. Castle kingside. Bishop f8 to e7. Knight d2 to f3. Castle kingside. Bishop c1 to f4. Bishop c8 to d7. Rook a1 to c1. Knight c6 to b4. Bishop d3 to b1. Knight b6 to c4. Queen d1 to b3. Rook a8 to c8. Knight e2 to c3. Rook c8 to c7. Knight c3 to e4. Pawn d5 takes e4. Rook c1 takes e4. Pawn e4 takes f3. Rook c4 takes b4. Bishop e7 takes b4. Queen b3 takes b4. Pawn f3 takes g2. King g1 takes g2. Pawn f7 to f6. Pawn e5 takes f6. Bishop d7 to c6, check. Pawn f2 to f3. Rook c7 to d7. Queen b4 to a3. Rook d7 takes d4. Bishop f4 to e5. Rook d4 to d5. Pawn f6 takes g7. Queen d8 to g5, check. King g2 to h1. Rook f8 to d8. Bishop b1 takes h7, check. King g8 takes h7. Pawn f3 to f4. Rook d5 to d3, check. Rook f1 to f3. Bishop c6 takes f3, checkmate.